Well, good morning. It's good to be here with you. This is not the way that I had anticipated being in worship this morning. Our travel plans didn't quite work out the way I thought they would, and we will be getting back into Oklahoma from seeing family in Florida later this afternoon, as opposed to this morning. I thought we would be getting in, but travel plans are sometimes difficult to get to line up, and they are always sometimes in flux or going through changes. But anyway, it is good to be with you this morning, one way or the other. This morning, as we celebrate this Sunday in the Christmas season, we're also nearing the start of a new calendar year. I want us to think about what it means to search. When I think about searching, I go back to it was actually this week, a couple of years ago. My family and I had gone to a large water park. We were on vacation, kind of like we were coming back from today. And we had spent a day in a water park with pools and slides, and there was a lazy river. And as we got there, the kids were so excited. And Walden and Atticus, they jumped right in the lazy river, and we started to kind of float around. It went around the outside perimeter of the water park, so you could kind of use that as a way of getting around the whole place. And after a little while, Walden had floated up ahead of us and got a little bit out of sight. And as we kept floating around the lazy river, we eventually realized that Walden wasn't with us. And no matter how far ahead we went, we couldn't find him. And as the reality that we had no idea where our son was began to set in, we did what I'm guessing most parents do, is we started to panic. And we started to swim as fast as we could around the lazy river. We got out and we started to look frantically in all of the different pools, and to look in the lines of people that were waiting to go up slides, and we could not find him. And the longer that went on, the more we started to panic, and the more desperate we got, until we're running around, yelling his name. People are looking at us like we're crazy, and eventually, like, the fear begins to set in, and you start looking to make sure there's nobody floating in the pools, and you start to convince yourself that he had drowned or there had been a medical emergency. You start to worry, oh my gosh, someone has kidnapped him. You have no idea what's going on. And in the midst of this panic, I was walking, maybe even running past a kiddie pool with this big play area in the middle with jets shooting water and sprays everywhere. And I glanced over, and there was Walden having the time of his life playing in this really cool pool. And I was so relieved. And that relief soon turned into anger. And I went up to him. I said, "Where have you been, and what have you been doing?" And I remember he had no clue that he hadn't been with us. He had no concept that things hadn't been going right, and that he was missing, and we considered him to be lost. And he said, "Dad, where did you think I would be? I was in the pool this whole time having fun." And it was just one of those moments that, you want to just, you were so thankful he was okay. You were so, angry and frustrated and scared. You just wanted to rip your hair out. And as I was thinking about that, I thought maybe that's a common human experience. This idea of a kid being lost, and the kid having no real notion of being lost. I remember when I was growing up, my younger sister decided it'd be fun to go and hide in one of the clothing racks at Dillard's department store, and stayed there for 30 minutes, and we had no clue where she was, and that same panic set in. So maybe this experience of losing a child, of not knowing where your child is a common human experience. And as we make our way through this season of Christmas, I also remember that Jesus' family, the Holy Family, had this same experience of losing their son. And so this morning, I invite you to hear these words from the Gospel of Luke. They come to us in chapter 2, verses 41 through 52. So hear now these words. Now every year Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was in the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found Jesus in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." He said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was obedient to them. His mother treasured all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and in years, and in divine and human favor. As we hear this story, it strikes me of just what a human experience that must have been for his family, and in particular Mary and Joseph, as they were unaware of where their child was and seeking him with great anxiety. And I sympathize with Mary and Joseph and the panic that they must have felt and the desperation and fear that they probably had as they searched for their son. This is the only story in Scripture that we get that tells us anything about Jesus between his infancy and the start of his adult ministry. It's this only glimpse that we get into Jesus' childhood. And it's just a fascinating story in so many ways. And I think it has so much to tell us and teach us about Jesus and about our experiences as people of faith. One of the first things that I think that this story teaches us, and I've kind of been alluding to it, is that it shows us the humanity of Jesus. You know, we often, especially around Christmas, we celebrate, the Word of God being made flesh and the divinity of Jesus. But this story reminds us that Jesus was also a human being. And we see that so clearly, I think, in this passage when we think about Jesus and what he's doing and how he's behaving. It's probably somewhat like a typical 12-year-old boy. He is on some level exerting a degree of independence or differentiation between himself and his parents and his family. He's saying, "Hey, I'm my own person," and he's pursuing things that interest him, somewhat without even really thinking about his parents, Joseph and Mary. And I think in that he's showing, hey, I'm a human like so many others on the face of the earth. I think Jesus shows his humanity. He's showing his curiosity and maybe even a sense of adventure. If you think about that day that you moved up from sitting at the kids' table at family gatherings to being able to sit at the adult table and how exciting that was, right? I think Jesus is experiencing some of that here as he is in the temple and he's sitting with these adults and these teachers and priests and maybe even rabbis who are engaging in adult conversations, and Jesus is getting to participate in that. And I think, for a 12-year-old boy, you're like, wow, this is so amazing and wonderful. And so when I see that, I remember Jesus' humanity, that Jesus was a human being like you and me. And so when we say the Word became flesh, it's an incredible proclamation, but it reminds us that Jesus was human, like you and me. I think this story is important also because it does a lot of foreshadowing for us. And it really tells us a lot about who Jesus is beyond, just the 12-year-old boy and who he will be. If we think about what Jesus is doing in the temple, he's sitting there and he's listening and he's learning and he's asking questions, and the priests and the teachers there in the temple, right? They're amazed by what they're hearing from this 12-year-old boy, right? It's not going to be the first time that they're going to be amazed by something that Jesus says or does. And so we get this little glimpse and this little foreshadowing of Jesus and his teaching and his authority that he will have throughout his ministry. And so there's almost even a sense that maybe his ministry is beginning right here and now as a 12-year-old boy. It strikes me that his family went to the temple, and they had been going for a number of years at Passover. And it's an important time. And as we think about Passover, we also know that as the gospel story unfolds, that it will be at this Passover time again where we find Jesus at his the place of crucifixion and eventually resurrection. And so it's saying, hey, pay attention to this season of Passover. It'll be important. I love the fact that we're told that his family searched for him for 3 days, right? Now, I can't imagine not knowing where my kid was for 3 entire days. But when we hear that, it should also, now that we know the whole gospel story, it should raise our little alarms for us. 3 days. We hear that again at the story of Jesus' burial, where he is in the tomb for 3 days. And after 3 days, he is resurrected. He rises from the grave. In our story this morning, we hear that after 3 days of searching, they find Jesus. And he says, hey, you know what? I'm in my Father's house. I'm in the presence of God. And so when we get this story later on of Jesus being in the tomb for 3 days, right? We know what happens at the end of 3 days. Well, we find Jesus in the presence of God. And then I think it also reminds us of the unique relationship that Jesus has with God, right? He says, here I am in my Father's house. And he says that to Joseph, his earthly father, right? And they don't understand why he would say anything like that. But it's this kind of foreshadowing and telling us and reminding us of the unique relationship that Jesus has with God. In fact, he's going to teach us also later on in the Lord's Prayer, where we pray, Our Father, to use that same terminology for God and that same closeness. But here it reminds us that Jesus has a special relationship with God. And so this is a great passage of really reminding us of who Jesus is and who Jesus will be revealed to be as the gospel unfolds. But I also love this story because it reminds us of the importance of searching, right? As we think about Mary and Joseph, right? They are desperately searching for their son. They're going to all extremes, right? They've traveled a day away from Jerusalem. They travel back. They're going through the whole town, desperately seeking their son. If we think about Jesus in this story, Jesus is searching as well, right? He's searching for knowledge and answers. He's in the temple and he's asking questions and he's listening and he's learning, right? He's seeking wisdom and understanding. And so we get this sense that, all of the major characters in this passage are searching. And I think that it reminds us of our lives of faith as well, right? In one sense, we are to be like Mary and Joseph, searching for Jesus, searching high and low, wherever we have to go, searching out Jesus. On another level, I think this story calls us or invites us to search like Jesus, right? To search for understanding, to search for wisdom, to ask questions. And so this passage, I think, in a lot of ways is about searching. What are we searching for in our lives, in our lives of faith. As we think about the coming new calendar year here in just a couple of days, what do we hope to seek out in 2019? And I think we get a sense of why that's important from Jesus and from this passage. We are told the last verse of chapter 2, Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. Right, and I think it's this reminder that all of us can age. All of us are aging right now. We are all older right now than when we gathered for worship this morning. Right, we are all aging, but the challenge I think is really for us to increase or grow, and in particular in wisdom and an understanding, right? Jesus is showing us that even though he has a special relationship with God, right, this relationship he has with God, even for him, evokes growth, right? Not just aging, but growing in an understanding, growing in a depth of relationship. And I think it reminds us that growing or increasing, it takes intentionality. It takes some deliberate work or actions, right? We see that in Jesus. He's clearly studied. He has some understanding, and he engages in deeper study and dialogue with people. He asks questions, and maybe most importantly, he goes to the temple because he knows that's a place where he can be in the presence of God. And so as we think about the close of 2018 and the approach of a new calendar year, I think we can stop and reflect on this one story we get of Jesus' childhood, where he goes and he seeks out wisdom and understanding in the presence of God. And I think this, the question that this provokes for me, or questions that this brings up for me, is what would it mean for me and really for all of us in this coming year to grow in wisdom? What would it mean for us to say, you know what, in 2019, I'm going to grow in wisdom? How would you do that? What would you hope to learn or gain in the coming year? I think this asks us, what would it mean for us as individuals and as a community of faith to ask ourselves and to ask one another and to even ask God challenging questions, right? To really to dig in deep and to not be afraid to ask really deep and penetrating and meaningful questions of one another, of ourselves, and of God. And the other question I have as I think about this passage is what would it mean for us to advance the awareness of God's work in the world? What would it mean for us to say, hey, this is what God's doing, and this is what we think God is about, and of course we are gathering as people of God. Where else would you expect us to be? How would we share that awareness of God's work and God's presence with the world around us? As we finish up this calendar year, 2018, I want to take just a minute to celebrate a couple of things. As I filed the end of the year reports and look at some of our numerical statistics, it's been really heartwarming and encouraging for me to see that, in this year that is ending, that we, for the first time in 5 years, will not see a decline in our average worship attendance, right? And I think that's great. I think that says, that we have increasing participation in the life of the church. And for that, I give thanks. Also, I want to celebrate the fact that, for the second year in a row, and for the first time, and that's, this hasn't occurred 2 years in a row for at least 10 years, we will pay a larger percentage of our apportionments than we did the previous year. And I don't know where we'll finish exactly with that, but I can tell you it's going to be more percentage-wise than it was last year, and I celebrate that because that's a sign of faithful and generous giving. And so there's a lot of wonderful signs of good things happening here in McLeod. And as I look forward to 2019, I want to really challenge us to think about how are we going to grow in wisdom? How are we going to ask ourselves challenging questions? How are we going to advance the awareness of God's work in the world? I hope you'll sit with those questions, and really think about that. And as you move into a new calendar year, really set some ambitious goals for yourself. Goals that say, I'm going to seek after God this year. And think about how you will do that. Do that with the reminder, with the knowledge that God came to us in the flesh, and that God is dwelling among us, and God longs to be with us, and God longs not just to be with us as we age, but to be with us as we grow and increase in wisdom and understanding and commitment as we seek out Jesus Christ today and into the coming year. God be with you. God bless you as we celebrate another year. And I look forward to seeing you next Sunday.